So in the past, a few non-Christians have asked me questions like, could God create a rock so heavy that he himself couldn't lift it? Or questions about how God can be all-powerful, all-knowing and all-loving at the same time. And they're not bad questions, but they're also not my favourite. And that's because they take God and they turn him into this distant force, this impersonal philosophical idea or a concept. And he's not just this force or an idea or a concept. He's a person. He has a personality and he has a character. And I don't know if you knew this, but God has a name. And sometimes I wonder if people knew that he wasn't this impersonal force and that he was a God that you could know, I wonder if people would be so quick to discount him. Let's have a think about that. In Exodus 34, Moses asks to see God's glory, and God says that he won't be able to show him his full glory because that would literally blow his mind. But he would introduce himself to him. And so God gives him his name and he says, Yahweh, Yahweh. That's God's name. That's how he introduces himself. It's Yahweh. And it literally means I am. So I have always been. I will always be. I am the most important constant thing in the universe. Now, Yahweh telling us his name is actually really significant, because if you tell someone your name, you're inviting them to be personal with you. Now, titles like Lord and God, they're good. Like, it's important to call your teacher Mrs. or Mr. because it shows respect. But giving someone your name is inviting them into a deeper relationship than that. In Yahweh giving us his name, he's showing us that he's not some distant or angry force, but he's someone who wants to know us. So, what is God like then? Well, God goes on to describe himself to Moses after giving him his name. So he says, Yahweh, Yahweh, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion and sin, but I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generations. Now, before we go on, that last part about laying the sins of parents on their children to the 3rd and 4th generations usually throws people off. But it's more talking about the seriousness of sin and the effects it can have on the whole family in this life. So, if a parent commits a crime and goes to prison, then it could have a lasting effect on the family. Now, but remember, even though the effects of sin might affect the 3rd and 4th generations, he also just said that God lavishes his unfailing love to 1,000 generations. Which do you think is more? Yahweh says that he is the God of compassion and mercy. This is the baseline emotion of how Yahweh feels towards us. He says it himself. He's slow to anger. That means that he's so patient. But actually there comes a point where something's so unjust that he gets angry about it because he cares about justice and protecting the weak and the needy. Anger can be a good thing, but it depends on what you're getting angry about. If you're angry at injustice, then that's what we call righteous anger. But if you're angry because things aren't going the way that you think they should, then that's probably not righteous anger. He says that he is filled with an unfailing love and faithfulness. He lavishes this unfailing love to 1,000 generations. This is the personal God that Yahweh is. He spreads an amazing love that comes from him, and he chooses to forgive the sin of those who are sorry. And he doesn't have to. Rightfully, he could punish us all, but he chooses to forgive us. But he doesn't excuse the guilty. Now, some people have a problem with Yahweh being a judge, saying that a God of love wouldn't punish someone, but that doesn't quite work. Yahweh is a righteous judge, and he cares for the weak and the needy. If you saw a man beating up his wife, the most loving thing to do would be to stop it, to have the man arrested and punished for that injustice. Yahweh is a God of love, and because of that, he is a perfect judge, and he holds the guilty accountable for their actions. that doesn't mean that they can't be forgiven and transformed by God's love, of course, but just because someone's forgiven for their sin, it doesn't mean that the consequences of their sin, like prison or having to pay for a crime, disappear. Ultimately, if you want to really know what Yahweh is like, just look at Jesus. I mean, he is Yahweh, he's God, so his character is exactly what he's like. So you can look at how he hung out with people and how he cared about people. I mean, even the fact that he came to earth shows us so much about Yahweh. If I told you that I was going to start living in a fish pond, and I was going to paint myself to look like a goldfish, and I was going to live like a goldfish, you may think that I was really, really weird, but you couldn't deny that I must love goldfish. And so with Jesus coming to earth and becoming human so he could take our place and die for our sins, you can't deny that he must love humans. And not because of anything that we've done. He chooses to love us because that's who he is. So God has a name. He has a character and a personality, and he tells us his name so we can get to know him personally. He's not something that you can get to the bottom of in a philosophical debate or conversation. He's a person that you need to get to know. And he, the great I am, is inviting you to get to know him by giving you his name, which is Yahweh. If you want to know more about this whole topic, there's a book called God Has a Name, which I'm basing this off. It's by a guy called John Mark Comer, and I really, really recommend it. It's a great read. But for now, I'll see you next time.